Okay, you can hear me. I hope you can see most of it. And I'm going to work from here because I want to be as close as possible to you. Now, the video clips have made me a bit cross. And I'm normally cross at the end of presentations rather than at the beginning. The people, those users, are dealing with problems we've known about for at least 30 years, probably 50. The problem is, why on earth does this information not get through the system that creates and builds buildings? We've known about this stuff for ages. That's kind of winding me up. Just one thing to start with is this quote. This is from Alan Ayckbourn, British playwright, who came out with this actor's saying, if you're playing a miser, emphasize their generosity. Now, that's what we're doing here. We're going to be talking a lot about faults in buildings, but I want also to talk about the good side, the bits that work, the happy bits, the happy users. And I'm going to be emphasizing the generosity, but kind of playing a miser. Now, I'm going to be using this term heuristic. What we need is a way of solving problems that is relatively accessible to us all, something that goes to the heart of the problem, and which isn't necessarily too scientific, which is built on professional knowledge, and which uses things like rules of thumb, that wonderful example of cigarettes in the submarine, or canaries in the coal mine. Those are rules of thumb. They're just as useful as any scientific model. Now, I'm in this relatively short presentation going to be building a heuristic, a way of thinking our way through some of these rather sticky and difficult problems. Whoa. Now, what I'm going to be doing is building a diagram. And this is the first component of the diagram. What are the most important things we need to think about? And some of the answers are obvious, some are very surprising. Now, if you force me to put this on a t-shirt, about building performance and what works, this is what you really need to worry about. Firstly, is a building shallow plan or deep plan? As soon as you go beyond the limits of natural ventilation, which is about 16 or 17 meters across the building, you're into complexity and you're into a different ball game. That is a very important dimension. The other dimension is a management dimension. It's about skills, resources, and money. If you've got the money to run a building properly, you're probably going to be okay. Most buildings, though, are too complicated for the resources and skills that people have. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. There are thousands of examples, but this is a kind of cartoon example for a quick presentation. A fisherman's cottage in the north of Scotland, been around for 300 years. Lovely, simple building, will probably be around for another 300, but miles from anywhere. Works well, very simple. There's nobody in that part of the world who knows about mechanical ventilation and all the gizmos and kit that goes into this building, which is it's a demonstration house at the Building Research Establishment in Watford, which has got every bit of bling and technology hanging off it. Now, the thing about technology, it's like Dutch bikes. Dutch bikes are completely wonderful in Eindhoven, and I can't take my eyes off them. I love them. The thing is, why aren't they everywhere in the world? If they work brilliantly here, but they don't work so brilliantly in Yorkshire, where you've got 1 in 3 hills to get up. It's like the London bus. It's great in London, but why not elsewhere? This building is probably fantastic as a demonstration building in the BRE, but as a lesson for the future, no way. There's 10 PhDs and money and sponsors and so on behind that building. This is more like, this one is a kind of Dutch bike of a building. Robust, slightly boring, but brilliant. Now, these are the dimensions that you need to worry about. And I'm going to build a diagram, and I'm doing it quickly because Marcel will hassle me to finish. Now, this building is well-resourced, and it's a shallow plan building. And it was one that we studied about 10 years ago. The trouble was it didn't win Green Building of the Year because it didn't fit any of the received wisdom about wonderful design. It was just a boring building in Norwich. Then we studied it, and suddenly it was on the front page of a journal that nobody reads, which is the Building Services Journal, which is great because we could be honest, and the gutter press don't get hold of it and put it all, and splash it all over the newspapers, making your life difficult. But look at the headline: the best building ever. Don't be ridiculous. There's no such thing. Now, this one, all the references, by the way, are on a separate page on the PDF. They're all clickable through. You can get them all. This one is a building where a lesson has been learnt, where there's been systematic feedback, where the National Trust headquarters at Swindon was studied, and the next generation of buildings worked on the results. And I've got a little bit of information here, which is about the user surveys on the building. Now, all you need to I know you can't see this at the back. All you need to concentrate on is the traffic lights. This is the profile of the things which don't work quite as well. Sorry, I've got a laser pointer here. Health. The health benchmark, which are the tick marks on the top, are the lowest of any benchmark. People always tend to assess the health rather poorly. Noise in that building, let me just, again, try and get my laser pointer. Noise is a red, which means it's significantly below the benchmark. And the rest are reasonably good. Summer temperature, they've all got greens. That is the profile of a really good building. Let's look at one which is under a deep plan office building, under-resourced. This is the profile that you get. And this is great news for Eindhoven, by the way, I realise, because look at the lighting benchmark here. Lighting is one of the two of the ratings from the occupants that's any good. And one of the reasons is because lighting has improved phenomenally over the last 10 years and had a huge effect on perceptions. It's probably the thing that's improved the most. And the one the highest benchmark there is image, the architectural one. Most buildings are rated highly, and this is a classic example of a building that looks great, in fact is not loathed, but the occupants really don't like it. There's kind of a lot of moaning about this building. I'm not going to name it. Perceived productivity that Vit's workshop is going to be about later on, very low. Temperature in summer, too hot in summer, typical. That is a typical profile of a building that's deep plan, under-resourced. If they tried harder, they could make it better. But many people, especially local authorities, don't have the resources to do it. This is the sort of stuff that really winds me up. This is a school, £40 million spent on it, which had classrooms for 90 people in the UK. 90. Now, work's been done over the last 25 years. If there's one thing you say about a school design, it's please, please don't have open plan classrooms. Because the most critical thing is that the children need to hear the teacher. If they can't, it's not education. Now, this is, and we got this from studies 20 years ago, but there's no way in which that information is getting to the people who write the briefs and the people who do the designs. The feedback isn't there. It's a major professional problem. And this is the Dutch bike stuff again. Exam question. How appropriate are green technologies such as MVHR for domestic use? Answer, go to the forum for the green buildings and AECB, and they'll tell you. Now, again, it's a question of money, it's a question of brains, and it's a question of resources. And quite often, especially in the UK, sophisticated green technologies are failing in areas that are usually about summertime overheating. And one of the reasons is because they're barking up the wrong tree. They're trying to make sure that the building doesn't fail, it is not too cold in winter, forgetting about the summer. I mean, that's a really crude interpretation, by the way, but it's, only got one line for one topic. Now, so that is going to go in the top left-hand corner of the diagram. The next set of things are about these. You've got to worry about all of these things. They're locational, climate zone, tropical monsoon, and the rest of the world. Tropical and monsoon need a different way of dealing with the indoor environment. The season, summer, winter, are not applicable. Don't worry about spring and autumn. It makes it too difficult. Just the summer-winter differences. Then, these are all time-related. And time-related stuff tends to get ignored. They tend to concentrate on the space and the building, not on things going on over time. Time is it the normal part of the week, or is it the vacation? In Britain, again in schools, all the robberies take place at the end of term, when there's a changeover for, that's the risk period. When the holidays come. The time of the week, weekday or weekend. You'll have all known about Monday morning coal buildings. It's a completely different profile. There's nobody there. The energy profile's different. Then, day and night. The biggest gains to be made in energy in buildings are by turning things off at night. And you can instantly often reduce by 25% the consumption. That's an important variable. So we're going to put all of those at the top of the diagram. On to the next group. Now, this one is the cultural perception of risk. Now, in Britain, we've just had an election, and the least risky party won. The party that was perceived as having more risk than the least risky party came second. It was about risk, really, as much as politics. Why are the Dutch so brilliant at transportation? I know you think you're not, the Dutch, but everybody else thinks you are. It's a complete pleasure and brilliant to go on the public transport system here. I love it. And the reason is the cultural perception of flood. Because if it rains, you start worrying. And underneath the entire cultural view of the Netherlands is the risk of flooding. And the reason you're so brilliant at integrated transport planning is that you have to be. That is an important aspect. It's different in India, in Japan, in China. Every culture has got their own perception of risk. And it's invisible most of the time to the people in that culture. They don't realise it. In Britain, I think our perception of risk is of losing our independence. If you look around Britain, you've got the Orkneys and Shetlands want to be independent of Scotland. Scotland wants to be independent of the rest of the United Kingdom, and Wales, and the Isle of Man, and Cornwall, and the Isle of Wight, and so on. We're absolutely obsessed with it. And of course, they think, the bonkers behaviour of the UK and the EU, that's about perception of risk as well. It's about this weird attitude towards independence. Here's another example. Excess winter mortality in Europe. People dying as a result of it going cold. Where does that happen? It happens in Portugal, Spain, Ireland, UK, Greece, all the warm countries. All the cold countries, Finland, Germany, and all the rational countries, I'm told health and safety obsessed countries, although that's Crit telling me that, I don't actually know, the Netherlands, all those countries don't lose so many people in winter. The mild countries, whose perception of risk is much lower, lose more people. It's an important variable. And the cultural geography, the perception of risk, needs to be in there. So we'll put it in the top right of the diagram. Now I'm going to put now another group of variables. again, related to time. And this is where it gets more abstract and a little bit more peculiar. Management response time. In non-domestic buildings, in fact any buildings, the faster managers respond to the need, the better. And here's a graphic which shows speed of response from surveys, you know, how fast your managers respond when you make a request for a change, compared with overall comfort on the study data that I carried out over the years. And the correlation is about 0.4. Not massive, but definitely a positive one. And for social science data, that's quite a good, and it is a significant correlation. But when you start digging around in this kind of data, what you find is that everything's correlated to everything else. And there's kind of lots of significant correlations in buildings, and that's because everything is correlated to everything else, because it's all connected. So you've got to be a wee bit careful with statistics in buildings. The management response time is definitely on the heuristic. It's definitely important. I'll come back to that in a moment. Distraction. 20 years ago, when we were putting our questionnaires together, noise wasn't even on the questionnaire. Unwanted interruptions now is a complete plague in buildings, as you'll know from working in them. And so that is going to go onto the map. And this is just a histogram from the building that you saw in slide 8, the earlier one, the Woodland Trust, which is a good building, but has got, I don't know, what, 60% of the staff frequently distracted. Not good, that. And a lot of the distractions never get fixed, like slamming doors. The best way of working, if you sit next to a door that slams, doesn't have a door closer that's quiet, that drives you crazy. And it's the sort of thing that never gets fixed. That's the kind of low-level, chronic nastiness that's in many, many buildings. The next one, this is important. And it's something that we didn't really understand until you kind of get a eureka moment when you're doing a case study. It is, yes, personal control is important, but you mustn't have too much of it. Too much of personal control is not a good thing. What you find is that if users in buildings understand design intent, in other words, if they understand what is supposed to happen, they will be more tolerant of things that go wrong. Now, this is an example. This is a horizontal sliding sash, which is a vernacular window. It slides horizontally. It doesn't slide vertically. And it's a kind of cheap Yorkshire version of the vertical sash, I think, not slash. Now, users understand how it works. It's obvious how it works, how sash windows work. It doesn't work very well, though. As a result, they're dying out, and probably quite rightly. But users like that sort of thing. They like sash windows because they can immediately see what to do, they immediately get a response, and they can immediately know whether the environment is being improved. And we've already seen, I mean, the first laugh we got in this conference was for somebody showing a ludicrous control. A kind of radio volume control, which is the wrong way, of course, of doing the thermostat, as somebody pointed out on the panel, you know, because people tend to either turn the volume up to full or down to low. Now, this is the sort of thing. No labelling, haven't got a clue what it's for. And if you look at this little assessment here, clarity of purpose, very poor, intuitive switching, very poor, labelling and annotation, very poor, ease of use, brilliant. It's dead easy to use, you press it, but you haven't a clue what it does. Indication of system response, none, there's no light or buzzing noise or anything. Now, the reason the iPad and Apple had a guy called Donald Norman who wrote a great book called The Design of Everyday Things. It used to be called The Psychology of Everyday Things, but the word psychology is a big turn-off to many human beings, so they called it The Design of Everyday Things instead. And they were obsessed with usability, and quite right too. If design intent is communicated clearly, occupants will be more tolerant and happier as a result. The next one is occupant density. And I put this is dialect, Yorkshire dialect. And I'm thinking, I've got no chance giving Yorkshire dialect to an international audience. It's there's most fratchin where there's least room, which means where the density is high, there's a great deal of quarrelling. And that is exactly the true in buildings. It's like a cocktail party. The more people, or a party, the more people come, you suddenly get a threshold when it's noisy, it's hot, and you want to escape. Now, this is one of the very rare buildings where we had an easy way of comparing two parts of the building with low and high occupant densities. And you can see the part of the building with low occupant density had a perceived productivity of plus 5%, and the high density areas below zero. There was a 5% productivity difference. For those of you doing this kind of thing, please study on the diagram. The next one is the system state. Now, and I've got three things here: adaptive comfort, indoor environmental quality, and needs. And let's just do one very rapidly. We're doing an entire subject in about a minute here. This is diagram, whoops, I've gone one too far. This is a diagram from the USA showing mixed mode buildings tend to have higher mean satisfaction scores. Mixed mode means a mixture of air conditioning and natural ventilation. That was 10 years after we did one that showed mixed mode buildings, the one in red, were tending to be the best buildings in Britain, but also there were some bad ones as well. You always get that. It's always the context. You know, if these buildings were under-resourced, they would immediately have poorer scores. Now, indoor environmental quality. I looked that up on Google, and you're going to get that all week. There are only 626,000 results on Google Scholar on indoor environmental quality. And as you lot know much more about it than I do, I'm going to leave that one to you and to the rest of the conference. And especially the seminar, there's a seminar on workplace productivity and indoor environmental quality. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about here. It's completely self-evident that if you deny people air and you deny them light, they're not going to be happy about it. But the incredible thing is that the same mistakes are being made over and over, because what you know is not being translated into the construction industry. This is a golden oldie. This is an occupant from a survey some years ago who was the most miserable person I've ever met in my life. He's British, of course. He's an academic. And this is almost a kind of competition on 20 things that have gone wrong with his workstation and his life. Now, the whole point of this is to avoid this sort of thing. Are his needs being met? Well, of course they're not. And one thing about... Right. 1 minute to go. And that was either 5 and 1 or just 1. And I bet it was just 1. Yeah. So... put needs before behaviour. Again, somebody said it earlier. Meet the needs first. Don't worry about trying to change behaviour. Habit's the flywheel of society. You'll never change it. So we put the system state variables onto the diagram. And there's just one more group. The outcome. Now, this is the best building I've ever been in, the one I love most. It's a school in Cheshire. And this is what we're aiming for. The children, the head teacher was just wonderful. I've never come away from a building study feeling happier and better. They even gave me a little Easter egg. I mean, it was just utopia. It was a wonderful building. So the perceived health, the perceived productivity, and the perceived control were all very high. The thing is, they're all the same variable. You correlate them all together, and you find that they're all the same. They're very highly correlated. The outcome, obviously, is perceived perceived goodness. And don't worry about whether it's subjective or not. We're all subjective. That's what life's about. Life's not about being objective. It's about meeting needs. So just 2 more slides. So we've now got the full diagram. And what we're going to do is simply, this one is set for a well-resourced, shallow plan building. And you can see that if we set it, all these variables, then for a well-resourced, shallow plan building, you'll get faster management response times, less distraction, better design intent normally, with the occupant density varying, they'll be more comfortable, there'll be probably better indoor air quality, and needs will probably be met. And perceived health will be better, perceived productivity will be better, and perceived control will probably be higher. So it's not that difficult. But they don't do it. Why don't they do it? So the second one is an under-resourced deep plan building. And guess what? You know what's going to happen now. If you get slower management response times, more distraction, opaque design intent, often design intent usability is taken away from people. It's too threatening and difficult for facilities managers to give people control. Occupant densities tend to be high because they're trying to squeeze so many people into the building. So those are the consequences. And just one slide to finish. This is a heuristic. We really know the answers. We really do. The public interest is important, not profit. This is about people's lives. And that's as has been stressed earlier. And it's really important to do that. And this one, building evaluation as a knowledge domain in its own right. This is a subject in its own right. It's not part of other disciplines. This is a specialist area, and you're all part of it. And I'll be very, very happy for any of you who are interested to go into this in more detail during the conference if we've got a little bit more time, but not now, because you know who is after me.